The Brian Crabtree Show on Demand is brought to you by The Outlet Online. Huge savings on items you want. It's a big deal. TheOutletOnline.com. The Brian Crabtree Show, live in Atlanta, afternoon starting at 4 on Biz 1190, Biz1190.com, and the Biz 1190 mobile app.
Please welcome
The Brian Crabtree Show.
Brian Crabtree Show.
Always great to have you at Brian Crabtree on Twitter, talk40.com. Next, we're going to take a twist on this hurricane coverage. What's happening in Florida? We've got a mortgage expert from Jacksonville. I'm going to talk about the conditions on the ground there with a lot of flooding in the St. Johns River all over the city. And really what this is going to do to the price of housing. Maybe you need to repair something at your house in Atlanta, Alpharetta. Labor's moving south. The building materials are going to be under high demand. How is all of this impacting real estate, housing, and ultimately your costs for everything around the home? These two massive hurricanes. Alyssa Stobbe, mortgage expert, author of the book, How to Get Approved for the Best Mortgage Without Sticking a Fork in Your Eye.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
You're based in Jacksonville, which in terms of flooding and flood surge got some of the worst in Florida of Hurricane Irma. How are things in Jacksonville?
Yes, we did. Thanks for asking. A lot of people are still without power. A lot of businesses are still without power. Our office is downtown. We have power, but phone and internet just came back up today, and it's still spotty. So we also have a flash flood warning in effect for downtown Jacksonville through this afternoon.
And now in the mortgage business, I would assume that most of coastal Georgia, coastal South Carolina, down through Jacksonville, all the way around to the Panhandle, throughout most of Florida, is there really any transactions going on in the housing business right now, or it's just cleanup and recovery? What can really be done?
Well, we're definitely trying to close some deals still. So anytime FEMA declares a disaster or puts a state on alert or people get evacuated, what's going to happen is people need to do a damage inspection to make sure that the home is still in habitable condition, that there's no damage. If there's damage, and it needs to be repaired before they can close on the house, because obviously the house is the collateral for the transaction, and it's important that it be in habitable shape. At
least in your coastal area around Florida, if you know more about the broad geography, are you seeing a lot of deals falling apart because there is significant damage? How widespread is that problem?
There's definitely damage. We observed that we have one of our clients trying to close, and a tree fell on the fence. So the seller needs to fix that, and then we can go ahead and close as soon as that's done. A lot of people were fortunate that they don't have damage. Some condominiums locally, we have a closing tomorrow that there's no damage, so they already checked that. So as long as there's no damage, there's no issue. It's just obviously to protect the lender as well as the buyer. So it just really depends. I mean, there's definitely damage sporadically throughout the county and throughout the whole state of Florida. So everybody's on a cleanup, but some people still don't have power. So that's the other issue. You know, the appraiser's got to get out there and appraise it. And if street lights are out and, you know, gas is scarce down here still, it's pretty crazy. So that's stuff for the appraiser to do if they don't have, electricity or gas.
Sort of hunker down. Are people going into the office and returning to normal, or is it pretty much still schools are out and people are trying to work from home with what limited resources they have in terms of power, water, internet? Is that still the case?
People are getting back to work. So we, some title companies that they didn't have a phone or internet yesterday. They got that this morning. So people are trying to dig out. And, the other part of it is, too, a lot of people had things to clean up. So their yards and palm fronds and tree branches and things of that nature. People had boats that, broke away from docks, and they had to catch those a few days ago. So there's all sorts of things people are still taken care of.
It's interesting how this worked, because Jacksonville got a really bad flooding out of the St. Johns River. One of my favorite spots in the whole wide world, Sanibel, Florida, which seemed to be in the dead-on eye of the storm, at least in the targeting and prediction models, but came away relatively unscathed without the storm surge, but just some trees down here and there. Sanibel, but you move up the coast, down the coast, Marco Island got really hit. You got Key West, just decimated down in the lower part of the Florida Keys. So it really is interesting how at different spots of the state of Florida there is a great tragedy. And in some cases, even though there's limbs down and power out, there's great relief. It's just, but no doubt, one of perhaps the largest cleanup efforts we've ever seen.
true. Yes, still a lot of damage being cleaned up, and I'm so grateful to the emergency first responders who have just been, working around the clock to get things taken care of. I live 2 blocks from the ocean myself, and I watched out my second floor window as they came out and fixed the street lights. The signs were down and the lights were out, and so I watched them get up in the the baskets and fix that. And the crazy thing is they had to wait till the winds got below 40 miles an hour before they could do that. And it just makes me think, okay, so if it's 39 miles an hour, the winds are coming through, those people are still up there, risking their lives to help us all be in better shape. So.
39-mile-an-hour winds is still nothing to sneeze at. We had that all day here in Atlanta, and it created quite a bit of damage. And that was generally the speed we faced on our impact by then Tropical Storm Irma, if you call it that. By the way, we're talking to Alicia Stobbe, who is a mortgage expert and author of the book, How to Get Approved for the Best Mortgage Without Sticking a Fork in Your Eye. This isn't just about housing, our discussion today. Do you get the sense, I've been a real estate expert on the radio for 2 decades. You're a mortgage expert all over the media. Those two paths collide and intersect. But as you look at the market, we are driven by supply and demand. And what we've just had happen in our nation, in Houston, in Louisiana, in most all of Florida, is we've had a major event, 2 events of damage that is going to create a run on supplies, lumber, building materials. It's going to suck labor out of the Midland of the country. We're seeing people in Atlanta already, from Home Depots to service organizations. They're going and getting fairly good jobs down in Florida to do cleanup work. We had someone quit our company. My wife mainly operates a company now, but we had somebody that's been with us for a long time quit to go down there. How do you see all of that in terms of cost of commodities in the housing market, in terms of suppliers and such, labor? It's already tight along the coast, hard to get things done, prices through the roof in terms of construction. I think we're about to see some significant upward pressure on housing prices due to building materials and labor costs. What say you on all of that?
I tend to agree with you. My hope is that it's only temporary. We are coming into a slower, home buying season. Typically, spring, summer is the busiest. People trying to get moved in before their, kids start school. But here it's been crazy. And, across the country, there's, multiple offers and bidding wars on properties. I'm sure you're seeing the same thing in Atlanta. So we're seeing that here. And, I have clients that just got under contract last night, and they've probably seen 24 homes. And they called me from one, literally asking for a pre-approval letter because there were six different people standing outside with realtors waiting to go in and see the home. So when you have that kind of pressure combined with scarce building resources, as you just outlined, it's definitely, I think it's definitely going to put a pressure on things to increase prices at least a little bit, and at least for the temporary.
So you're thinking it's going to be temporary and not so long term. And I don't disagree with that in principle. I just think that when you have so much devastation, we have to basically rebuild the Florida Keys. We have the equivalents by the time you factor from Naples, Florida, all the way up the coast to the Panhandle. You probably have the equivalent of rebuilding Tampa in that large area because of just it's not any high population area. Then you've got the problems in Jacksonville. You add all that in together, the damage in Houston is probably equivalent to that or higher. It would seem to me that what will happen is we're going to trigger this mass need for labor and demand. And as you've said it, not only just in Atlanta, but especially along the coastal areas from North Carolina down to Miami, we're seeing a boom in terms of housing and building and buying. And then there's this thought process that a lot of people have, especially people that live along the coast. With all of this damage, I can go down there and buy my second home at a song and a dance. It may not have any walls or windows anymore, but in certain parts of Florida, people are going to kind of converge to see if they can bottom feed off of the opportunity where people, I'm hearing, especially in the hardest hit areas, are saying, I'm done. I'm not rebuilding. I'm out of here. So how do you see all that, and what have you seen in the discussions in Florida?
Well, the discussions in Florida, I think, for the most part, people, if they're done and they're not rebuilding, they're obviously frustrated. Although it's interesting because in our area, we've been so fortunate. We were, hit with Hurricane Irma this year and Matthew last year. But other than that, it's been almost 2 decades since we saw hurricanes that did we saw some flooding in 2008, but I mean, other than that, there hasn't been significant damage. So, I mean, if people are going to take advantage of that, there's always somebody who's poised and ready to take advantage of any situation, right? Those are the people who have the cash ready. They don't care if the house gets rebuilt because they're not going to get a mortgage to purchase it. So there are definitely those people out there that will take advantage of that opportunity. I don't know that overall that's the sentiment, though.
I mean, you're on the ground, so yeah, I sense it's not. I lived in Charleston, South Carolina for 17, 18 years, and generally after a hurricane, you have a kind of a lull period in the real estate business, and then all of a sudden it booms again, and you can get some advancement and some momentum that builds up like a flywheel that's overblown, and that's what I fear about what may happen in the housing market due to price of materials, labor cost. A lot of housing stock has been damaged or destroyed, and it may artificially drive up prices, which creates a need for a correction thereafter. Now to the mortgage business, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this. We're talking with Alicia Stobbe, mortgage expert, but I've said this week, just for context, that as I watch all this aid come pouring in, we all become socialists, so to speak. Once there's a natural disaster, we sort of want the government to step in and take care of all of our problems, our losses, our damage. To a certain degree, the government does need to come in and save people and rescue them in areas like Jacksonville. But when you have mandatory evacuations, you've got people that are staying with their property for whatever reason, risking their lives and then risking first responders' lives. And all of this parlays into a point I'd like you to respond to. It seems to me that what we're learning in these two immediate in the immediate reaction to these two disasters is that people don't have their financial house in order in terms of mortgage, in terms of insurance, in terms of a rainy day fund. And that really starts at the mortgage application process where they're getting qualified to buy a home. Do they really have in order a rainy day fund for a natural disaster, the likes of Irma or Harvey? What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you're aware, but Fannie Mae just increased their debt-to-income ratio on the back end up to 50%. So that happened in August. So what that means for the layperson is that basically you have people that can now the cap was pretty strict, 45% over the past several years. So now people can have their mortgage payment and their minimum monthly payments take up to 50% of their gross income when they're buying a home with a conventional mortgage. So conventional mortgage you can put down as little as 3% if you're a first-time home buyer. So there's a lot of stacking going on. So it's interesting, I mean, because we see both sides of the coin. We see young professionals in their 20s who are very well qualified, have retirement funds, have the 6 months, cash stash for if, they should lose their job or need money to, replace anything from a hurricane or any other damage. And I believe also that when people buy a house, they should also set aside at least 2 months worth of mortgage payments to cover anything that might come up. And that's even on the lien side. It could be their air conditioning goes or the heat system or anything like that. And, those repairs, you have a home inspection and you hope for the best and that it's accurate. You can also get a home warranty. But, there's sort of, to me, there's not really a middle ground from what I see. I see people who are very well qualified and have excellent cash reserves. And then the people who, sometimes you're not even required for an FHA loan sometimes to have 2 months worth of reserve payments for that mortgage. And, there's down payment assistance programs, which are fantastic. They definitely help perpetuate home ownership. But that's the opposite spectrum where people, they don't have that reserve.
But to some extent, though, and I know this is antithetical to housing and mortgage, but if you have no money and you are trying to buy a home and you're in an area prone to natural disasters such as Florida, and you use a down payment assistance program, which is in some cases borrowing to make a down payment, in some cases it's a grant, and then lo and behold, a Hurricane Irma comes flying through, you'd be better off at that moment being a tenant because now you've got whatever the insurance company doesn't cover, you've got a deductible, you've got your personal property damage, and you've got to fight with an uphill battle with an insurance company before you get benefits. It's not immediate. And for a couple of weeks even, you could find yourself having to stay in a very high-priced, price-gouging hotel. And some people don't even have that to manage without putting it on a credit card if they're so lucky to even have those resources. Isn't this an indication of us moving back in a very dangerous direction in housing and the American people ultimately not taking responsibility for their own livelihood and well-being?
Well, possibly. I mean, I think if we, hurricanes are, hit and miss. So if we, didn't have this issue, will we be having this discussion about people having enough reserves? So I am very conservative myself. I definitely agree with the 6 month reserves. And, but on the other hand, we see people with down payment assistance stay in that property and make a great home out of it. So, it all depends. It's probably just your risk tolerance, I guess, and really whether or not you're capable of taking the risk and where you live pertinent to the rate of natural disasters. I mean, in Georgia, it could be a sunny day, and this evening it could be a tornado that becomes the disaster. It doesn't have to destroy thousands of homes around you. It can just be a single city block or a single street in a neighborhood that's the problem. But we'll leave it there. All very interesting and great to have the report from Jacksonville in Florida from a mortgage and housing standpoint. Alicia Stobbe is the mortgage expert. You've got a website. You're all over the media, so you probably Google your name and find you everywhere. But what's your website? Yeah, Alicia Stobbe Books, ELYSIASTOBBEBOOKS.com.
Great to have you with us again.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Brian.
The Brian Crabtree Show on Demand is brought to you by The Outlet Online. Huge savings on items you want. It's a big deal. TheOutletOnline.com. The Brian Crabtree Show, live in Atlanta, afternoon starting at 4 on Biz 1190, Biz1190.com, and the Biz 1190 mobile app.